just to start by introducing me, I'm Ellen Hawes. I'm the fundraising officer at the Inland Waterways Association. And I know I've spoken to quite a few of you from various restorations. So yeah, it's nice to see you here. This is our first Thursday lunchtime breakout session of this year's 2020 slightly delayed restoration conference. We're hosted by the Inland Waterways Association and the Canal and River Trust. I will hand over to Liz Shaw, who has joined us today. We're extremely grateful that she's spared some time for us today. She's a senior engagement manager for the Midlands and East region of the National Lottery Heritage Fund, and is obviously here to talk to us today to give us some top tips for writing good funding applications. So if I can hand over to Liz.
Fabulous. Thank you very much, Ellen. So yes, as Ellen says, hi everyone, my name is Liz Shaw. I'm Senior Engagement Manager for the Midlands and East for the National Lottery Heritage Fund. So normally I'd be based in our Birmingham office, but obviously with everything that's going on at the moment, I'm actually working from home. So today I'll be giving you a brief update on where we are with our funding. I'll also be exploring some top tips on what makes a good application. And as Ellen said, if you have any questions that come up along the way, please just pop them into the Q&A, and at the end, I'll do my very best to answer them. So first of all then, and on to our funding. So in 2019, we launched our new strategic funding framework and our organisational restructure. Now, I could spend the rest of this section talking about the new strategic funding framework, but instead what I'll do is I'll pick out a few key highlights. So this introduced one grant programme, one main grant programme called National Lottery Grants for Heritage, from £3,000 to £5 million, with different requirements for different levels of grant, so that we weren't asking someone who was applying for £3,000 to do the same as someone who was applying for £5 million. We also kept our Heritage Enterprise Grant Scheme, which funds the restoration of historic buildings at risk. And we also introduced a number of themed campaigns that would happen at different points over the next 5 years. We reduced our outcomes for funding from 14 down to 9, and said that people just had to meet one outcome for funding, a mandatory outcome, which was that a wider range of people would be involved with heritage. We increased our emphasis on inclusion, environmental sustainability, evaluation and acknowledging the National Lottery. And we also introduced some stated priorities as well. For example, landscape and nature, inclusion, community heritage and heritage at risk. And then of course, in March, we went into lockdown. So at this point, we had 2,500 projects which were either in their development phase or actually delivering on the ground, with a commitment of over £1 billion that were now facing quite serious issues. So we did our best to help existing projects by being as flexible as we could, also looking at grant increases where they were needed. We also introduced the Heritage Emergency Fund in the summer, which awarded 961 grants worth £49.8 million. We're also running a number of grant schemes that are being delivered on behalf of or in partnership with government departments and other organisations. So for example, the DEFRA Green Recovery Challenge Fund and the Culture Recovery Fund for Heritage. Just before this all happened, we had actually launched our digital campaign, and during COVID, digital has just become more and more important. So we gave that a boost. So if you go to our website, which is www.heritagefund.org.uk, you can find guidance notes and webinars that we've produced on topics such as working with young people online, on doing heritage learning online. We've also awarded grants to 2 programmes, the Digital Heritage Lab and Heritage Digital, and they're delivering digital training, boot camps and resources. So again, do have a look at those, and you can find links to those on our website. We've awarded grants to 6 partnership projects for enterprise development and business support. This is part of our capacity building campaign, and I've got some really exciting news because it's just hot off the press that a number of these have actually launched today. So I believe the link is going to be put into the chat. I really would encourage you to have a look at these. So there are a number of programs which you can sign up for, which will help with all kinds of things around organisational resilience, from fundraising to business planning. Do have a look at those and see if you're interested in signing up to any. So what's next then? What's happening now? Well, currently we're planning what our next phase is for our funding. This has been really actively discussed at the moment, and so we're hoping to have some news on that in the next few weeks. What I would recommend is signing up for our e-bulletin or following our social media, such as Twitter, because then you'll be the first to find out about any new grant schemes, the digital campaign, the enterprise development and business support, for example. Our National Lottery grants for Heritage were paused earlier this year due to what was happening with coronavirus. We are planning to reopen them in 2021. We haven't got an exact date yet, and they are likely, I think, to be tweaked in order to respond to coronavirus as well. So the next part of this session then, I'd like to focus on top tips for putting together a good application for funding. But first of all, I know that watching this seminar will have people with a wide range of experience. There'll be some people who are new to fundraising, other people who've submitted many applications. So what I thought it would be good to do is to first of all ask you about what is your one top tip for a good funding application. So as Ellen said, if you can pop this in the chat, Ellen's then going to pick a few of those out to highlight. So if you just want to pop in there about what is your one top tip for a good funding application.
So we'll give this about a minute or so to, if you'd like to share some ideas based on your own experiences. We're getting some responses now talking about make sure you meet the criteria, read the criteria carefully, read the rules, answer the questions, read, understand, answer the question written, read the criteria of the funder, read the criteria of the bid very carefully. You've all done your homework. I am so impressed. This is brilliant. I think unless anyone else has got a few other comments coming in. And yeah, somebody else suggested get some help from somebody who's done it before. So again, this is what hopefully our community of the Restoration Conference, Restoration Hub really helps with. We can all help each other with this. We've had some really nice suggestions. I'm sure you've seen what's come in as well, Liz, so that's helpful. I was just going to add my top tip, which is pretty similar to everyone else's, which is really listen to what your funder is asking of you. So on that note, I'll hand it back over to Liz.
Thanks a lot, Ellen. So it sounds like a lot of similar top tips there, and actually very similar to what I'm going to cover as well. So that's really excellent to know. So I've been with the fund now. I've been with them for 16 years, and during that time, I've advised lots of different projects, including quite a number of canal projects. So I thought it'd be useful to start with what the kind of key things that often come up when I'm talking to canal projects. What are the things to perhaps think about in planning a project? So the first one on there then is land ownership. So this does come up quite a bit, especially with restoration projects. So do you own the land that you want to do work to? Who does own that land? Are you looking to take on a freehold or a lease for it? Are you looking to work in partnership with the owner? And how will you meet the funder's ownership requirements, which was going back to your top tips about reading and understanding the funding criteria. The next one on there is master planning. So obviously restoration projects often cover huge stretches of canal, and usually you're approaching us for a phase as part of that bigger scheme. So it can be useful to have a master plan so funders and others can understand what your plans are for that bigger scheme and how you're planning to achieve it. And also we can understand how our phase works within that bigger picture too. I also have to say, of course, that while you're approaching us for a phase that's as part of a bigger project, that has to work as a project in its own right as well. The next one is wildlife and ecological surveys. So it's really important to understand what impact your project will have on nature and wildlife, and also how you can build in benefits for the natural world as well. So there is some really good guidance by CRT and IWA on this, and they're going to post the link to it in the chat so you can have a look. The next one is connection to the canal network. So we tend to prioritise projects that are connecting to already watered stretches of canal, as those tend to see the most usage and the most benefits. Options, business case and evidence of need. So you should have explored all the options for what could be done with your project and be able to show that your plan is the best and most viable way forward. You will have built a business case and have evidence for the need for the project, and you can clearly state how it's going to benefit people, heritage and the local area, and also how it will link into any local or national strategies, regeneration initiatives or the existing canal network. Partnerships is the next one, and I'm sure that we've all worked in partnership in the past on projects. There can be formal partnerships where you sign an agreement with someone, or it can be something that's more informal. So yes, it could be with the owner, it could be with CRT, it could be the college that you wish to run training courses with, it could be the community group that you want to run activities for. Activities and capital. So this is one that comes up a lot, particularly with our National Lottery grants for heritage, because under that scheme, because we've got that one mandatory outcome that that a wider range of people will be involved in heritage, we like to see that as part of projects, there are activities in there to get people involved in the heritage, to get them exploring it, volunteering with it. So they're really finding out about why this heritage is so important. And ongoing maintenance and management. So once the funding ends and the project ends, what happens then? Who's responsible for managing it? How are you going to cover any costs? How will you maintain it? How will you staff it? These are all questions and things to think about. So I thought to cover some more general top tips on applying for funding. So the first one is about consultation. So consultation is so important. It's about finding out if other people support your project. It's about getting advice on your project, getting feedback that will help you to shape your project and make sure it's a success. So you should consult with people and organisations who may be interested in what you want to do, who may benefit from what you're doing, or who you want to get involved in some way. And there's lots of different ways of consulting people and organisations. It's something I get asked about a lot. So I thought I'd ask the question again, using our collective brain, about what methods can you use to consult people and organisations. So again, use the chat. What are the methods that you've used in the past, or ones that you think that you could use in order to consult people and organisations? And again, Ellen's going to select some of the highlights from that.
So over to you, Hive Mind, and your great experience and some of your expertise in this. It will be useful to hear what you have done. Again, part of the sharing exercise in terms of what works well, what doesn't work so well. Opportunities like this are brilliant. So I can see that some people are suggesting using Facebook using surveys. It'd be interesting to see what those surveys kind of, if they're physical, stopping people on the streets, or what works. Working with your local councils, particularly the smaller ones, parish councils, social media, talking to community leaders and local politicians, focus groups. That's an interesting one to try and organise. So again, it would be useful to have examples of where that's worked for people. Public displays in the local community, on-site user surveys, face-to-face workshops as people feed off each other, membership magazines, again bringing people into you, open days, lots of fantastic ideas. Just talking to people walking past, passers-by at work parties. I know that's incredibly fruitful for many restorations. So it's capturing all of that data. And somebody suggested the pub, which is not necessarily available in all parts of the country at the moment, but we can aspire to that at some point. But brilliant ideas. You all really seem like you know what you're doing. It's great. Back to Liz.
Yeah, there's some really, really good ideas there. That's fantastic. Absolutely brilliant responses there. Am I right, Ellen, that the chat's going to be shared as well afterwards?
I understand it can be captured. I'm not quite sure how, but I will certainly be jotting some of these down. So yeah, some really great ideas.
Great, excellent. So the next question I wanted to ask is kind of an extension to that, and I think it's one that's going to come up even more in the current situation, which is that, bearing in mind restrictions for COVID-19, what methods could you use for consultation? So will these be the same things again? Will you need to take a different approach? What new methods perhaps could you use? And again, Ellen's going to select some highlights for this, so do pop them into the chat. That would be fantastic.
So again, I suppose it's the tried and tested, what you have found that has worked actually over the last few months in still managing to capture people's ideas and input and in your own projects. We have had a few suggestions already to do with online surveys. Some people have suggested using SurveyMonkey as a way of doing that, which I know is quite an easy tool. Zoom meetings, again, our new world order is very much around Zoom meetings. Newsletters, the website, again, I suppose making sure that your shop window gives an opportunity for people to get involved and comment and what have you. And again, somebody said the same kind of things as they would be doing face to face, but just by different means. So again, somebody, yeah, Facebook, face to face interactions still work. Yeah, I think, again, fair comment. Local newspapers, again, it's local newspapers and radio stations as well. If you can tap into what's actually sort of happening in your local communities and what people are actually engaging with. Zoom meetings, yes, don't work for all groups, somebody's commented, which I think, again, it's trying to be inclusive about what you're doing, and trying to make sure you are reaching the people that you really want to reach. So if Zoom or social media isn't quite doing it, I suppose some of the other things that have been mentioned would still hopefully capture those people. Thank you again for all of your input there. Brilliant ideas. Back to Liz.
Thank you. Yes, some fantastic ideas there. And I think we are seeing a lot more happening online, but as you say, that doesn't work for everyone. So it is thinking about other ways of doing things as well, definitely. And also, if there's certain, say, certain people who you'd like to get involved in your project in some way, it could be contacting direct those kind of organisations who represent those people as well to consult them and get some feedback too. But some fantastic ideas there, thank you. So the next one is to get advice. I think this was mentioned in the top tips at the start as well. So yes, I'm going to go out to our hive brain again. So where could you get advice for your project? Which people and organisations would you approach for your particular project to get advice? And again, if you'd like to pop your answers in the chat, Ellen will pick out some of the highlights. Thank you.
I'm so impressed. There's no time to rest in this presentation at all, but everyone is really contributing. Fantastic. So yes, and somebody might get a gold star for mentioning something in particular today, if I suppose in the chat box. So yes, council, your local council has been mentioned a few times. Canal users, hang on, that's consulting. LEPs has been mentioned by somebody. I'm not sure if everybody is familiar with the local enterprise partnerships, but they are very worthwhile keeping in touch with, to do with all kinds of issues, funding, local plans. So keep in touch with them alongside your local council. We've got yeah, another really good suggestion. Inland Waterways Association, gold star, but also other restorations who have been there, done that, are a wealth of knowledge and are always usually really good at sharing their own experiences. So speak to other restorations. If you can find somebody who's sort of just slightly ahead of your stage, they are incredibly useful to know. Wildlife Trust, somebody's mentioned, and volunteer action. The old volunteer bureaus, as was, are again an incredibly useful source of information, access to volunteering opportunities, access sometimes to funding databases and funding supports. Some of them put on local workshops from funding organisations. So there's a way of finding your local volunteer bureau, volunteer action group, through a website called NAVCA. So really encourage you to be in touch with them. Other charities as well, people are suggesting. So somebody suggested Mind, Help for Heroes, grant finding websites and funding experts. And I just wanted to shout out for something that we can organise for restoration societies. We have a subscription to Grants Online, who are, it's basically a funding database list that puts out regular updates about what funding's available. We can have a reduced kind of subscription cost for restorations that subscribe through us. Somebody might correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's £99 or something for a subscription through us. If anyone is interested, then yeah, please give me a shout and we can investigate signing you up for that. And yeah, somebody else has mentioned double gold star to our funding surgery meetings that I do alongside my lovely colleague at CRT, Sam Tuck, who is also a fundraiser for the Canal and River Trust. We have quarterly funding surgeries where we have one-to-one meetings with restorations to talk about their very specific fundraising issues. And we haven't actually got a set date for the next one, Sam, have we? But keep looking on the restoration, on the Canal River Trust restoration Facebook group. Dates will go on there and they'll go out through our Restoration Hub newsletter as well for the next one. And somebody said it's £60 for Grants Online if you're interested, so let me know. But all that aside, thank you again all for all your amazing comments. Back to Liz.
Fantastic, thank you very much. And again, some really good suggestions there, so thank you. I think you covered most of the ones on my list, actually. I think the only ones I can think of are, depending on what kind of heritage you're dealing with, it could be worth speaking to Historic England, Natural England. If you want to do a project to record people's memories of the past, there is actually an Oral History Society who can provide free advice, and also your local archives can provide free advice on those kind of activities too. So the next one is planning and understanding your project. So really making sure that you know the who, what, where, when, why and how of your project and how it's going to be delivered, and doing the initial work that's needed. So say, for example, if your project involves a building, carrying out a condition survey so you know what condition it's in, and what kind of works are needed to it. Also having a think about what you need to deliver the project. So do you need any extra staff, for example? Do you need any specialist expertise, any training for yourselves? Do you need extra volunteers? These are all kinds of things that we can actually support as part of our funding. The next one is understand the risks. So every project has risks attached to it. So this is about understanding yours and what you can put in place to either reduce the risks or to deal with them if they do crop up. And also that can have an effect on how you're planning the timescales for your project, and also the costs that are involved in your project as well. The next one is about understanding the audience. So this is about understanding who visits, who uses your heritage at the moment, what their interests are, what their needs are, but then also thinking about who is that wider audience that you want to get involved. So who are those new people that you'd like to attract, and what are their needs, what are their interests, what are perhaps barriers to them getting involved in at the moment, and what could you do through this project to help with that? And the next one is the one that I think lots of people got on the top tips at the start. So understanding the funder. So that's making sure that you target your application right. So really understanding their guidance. If you're able to speak to them before you apply, that can be really helpful. Also understanding about how you approach them. So is it a funder that you can write a letter to? Do they have an application form? Do they have set criteria that you need to show how your project is meeting? Yes, so those are the kind of key general top tips for before you apply. And then for the actual application form itself, the first one on there, again, people highlighted in the top tips at the start. So read the guidance and help notes. So for example, for our National Lottery Grants for Heritage, we have application guidance, and then we have help notes, which tells you what we're looking for in each of the questions. So it's really useful to have that to hand when you're filling in the application. The next one is avoid jargon and acronyms and keep it simple, concise and precise. So we deal with lots of different types of heritage, for example, each of which has its own jargon and its own acronyms. So what we recommend is, where you do want to use acronyms, is just use the full title first and put the acronyms in brackets, and then you can use the acronyms after that. But then we're very clear about what it relates to. Keep it simple, to the point, and use those details that you have. So it may be the number of events that you're going to be delivering. It may be the exact training that you're going to give to volunteers, for example. And also assume that the person assessing your application doesn't know the project, so that it comes across really clear what you're wanting to do in there. The next one is on budget. So first of all, what I always recommend is to break down the project costs, so we can see how you've worked out that bulk cost and what lies behind that, and we can see the value for money then that your project represents. Also check out your funder's VAT position. So for us, we won't fund any VAT that you can reclaim. So if you can claim it back, we won't fund that VAT. However, if you can't claim it, we ask you to separate it out and put it in a separate column in the budget in the application form. Obviously, always include an amount for contingency. And also make sure that you follow the funder's procurement guidelines as well. So why and why now? So these are always important things to get across in an application. The why is this project needed? And why now can be a very important question when there's lots of competition and decision makers are trying to make a decision between a number of high quality projects. It's that, why does this project need to go ahead now? What would happen if it didn't go ahead now? And getting that across clearly in the application really helps. The next one is just to ask someone to read your application form before you send it in, because then they can make sure that what you want to get across in there is coming across really clearly and really well. So I thought it'd be useful just to have a think about the future, particularly with COVID-19 and all what's happening at the moment. So this next section is really my personal opinions on what I think are likely to come up in terms of funding applications and what funders are going to be looking for, basically based on my experience and also on just looking at the funding environment at the moment. So the first one on there is about the impact on your organisation. So I'm sure many of you are doing this anyway at the moment, but think through and gather evidence of how this is impacting on you, what you've already done about it, what else you need. So do you need to review your business plan or your forward plan? Do you need money to help cover essential costs? Do you need to introduce new equipment? What are the things that you need? Because I think funders will be interested not only in how your organisation is during this time, but also I think there may be other funds coming out from other funders to help organisations with this kind of issue. The next one is the impact on your project idea. So I imagine many of you were already planning projects before COVID-19. So have a think about how COVID-19 has impacted on your project. How's it impacted on suppliers and contractors? What difference will that make to your project? Is it going to change your timescales? Is it going to change your costs? Are there now new risks that you need to take into account? Are there new health and safety things that you need to consider? And how will it impact on the events that you're hoping to deliver, on your volunteers? So again, I think funders will want to see that you've thought this through and aren't coming forward with a project that doesn't take COVID-19 into account. And then we have impact on your community. So we all know about the impact that COVID-19 is having on the economy, on jobs, on people's lives and well-being. And we've also seen how the importance of nature, the environment and green spaces has really been highlighted by the crisis. So what can your project do to help with this? Could it provide traineeships or job creation, nature conservation? Could it provide wellbeing programs with opportunities for people to get active, learn something new, give something back and connect? Could it link in with regeneration initiatives or do something really strong around environmental sustainability? So again, and this is my personal opinions, but I think going forward, funders will be interested in the difference that your project can make in the current environment and in the recovery from COVID-19 as well. So thank you very, very much for listening, and thank you for your involvement as well with the questions. And now it's time for you to question me. So yes, Ellen has been collecting the questions on the Q&A. I'm sure there's still time if you want to add any more on there. So yes, Ellen, if you want to take it away.
We've had some questions. Thank you for those that have asked questions. As Liz said, plenty of time to pop your question in the box. But if I can kick off with some of the questions we've already been asked. So I've got a question about, it's very specific about this canal. So if our canal does not connect to the national network, how do we best make the case to the Heritage Lottery if they prefer it to be so?
Okay, so I think in that case, the best thing to do would be to have a conversation with us, because then we can fully understand about the context of your canal, where it is, what your plans are, and then we can give you advice on that basis. So I think once our grants relaunch, I think it'd be really good to have that kind of conversation with us.
Thank you, Liz. I've got a couple of other questions here. I've got a question about the funding environment. How do you see the funding environment changing in 2021 as a result of COVID?
So I think a lot of that was covered on that COVID slide. I think funders will be very much, will want to hear from you about the impacts that COVID has had, how you're dealing with that, and how you're taking that into account in your projects. And I imagine that there will be more funding coming forward to help organisations around COVID-19 as well. And I think we've seen already that some of these funding pots that come up do have quite short timescales as well. So I think that's something to be, just to be prepared for too.
Indeed, and if I can really up the ante and mention the B word, are there any possible implications of Brexit that you might be preparing for at the moment?
I think not immediately in terms of our funding. I think what it will affect is probably some of our policy. So for example, at the moment, we ask about state aid, for example. In terms of procurement, we have OJU, the European procurement. So I think there's bits of policy that it will affect, but probably not our main kind of grant funding.
Okay, that's interesting. Another question here about pitfalls. What are the most common pitfalls that you tend to see in funding applications?
So I think I think with ourselves, with our grants, that thing around the balance between activity and capital is a big one. So we do see a number of applications come in where the majority or all of the costs are related to the capital, the physical works, and there's nothing in there at all for getting people involved or for volunteering. And so that's probably one of the biggest things. I think other things that often crop up are things like no contingency or not enough contingency, thinking about inflation as well. So things around the budget, I guess.
Interesting. And I've got a question here about match funding. I suppose, well, the question is, what is the situation with regards to match funding? I suppose it's whether you feel that the situation may change with regards to match funding for some of these funds that are being announced, or if you'd just like to explain the sort of the current rules or the previous rules as well.
Yeah, sure. So when our grant scheme, the National Lottery Grants for Heritage relaunches, I do imagine things being tweaked slightly because of coronavirus. However, I don't know if match funding is going to be one of them. I'm being perfectly honest. I'm not sure. So it's something, I guess, to keep an eye on. At the moment, we do have minimum amounts of match funding for National Lottery Grants for Heritage. In terms of how that may change, I'm not sure.
Okay, watch this space, I think, on that one. So a question here about building the track record of an organisation. Do you have any advice about building the track record, for example, for moving from a smaller to a larger project, what would you expect to see in terms of the organisational resilience that's built into those projects?
Well, I think there's a few things to consider there. So one thing is that with the National Lottery grants for heritage, during the development phase of that, you can actually include costs in there to help with organisational resilience. So if there are areas that you need to strengthen in order to be able to deliver that bigger project, you can use the development phase to do some of that work. So that may be some work around governance, it may be work around business planning, for example. Also, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, we've just launched, the programs have just launched around business development, and those are all around organisational resilience. So I really would recommend taking a look at them and just seeing if there's any that really chime with you and in terms of how you want to develop.
Yeah, that's again hot off the press news of it. It's only really just been announced this morning, and I haven't had much of a chance to have a look, but they do look like they could be some really, really useful kind of bits of support and training and advice in those packages. So I think Katie had put a link to that earlier, but obviously we will share that around. We've got about another 5-10 minutes or so for a few more questions. So if anyone else has got that burning question that they've always wanted to ask the Heritage Lottery Fund, please take the opportunity now. But just to talk about this next question to do with the issue of which funder to apply for first. Again, in your sort of jigsaw puzzle of matching funders with other bits of funding, is there a recognised pecking order in terms of the Heritage Lottery, or is there a sort of a good basis for working out who to go to first, who might commit their funding first, from your experience?
I'm not aware of a pecking order. I think one thing to note, and this very much depends on the level of grant that you're applying to us for, because obviously at larger stage, it's a 2-stage application process. So we don't expect you to have all your funding secured when you come to us for the first application for that bigger project at the end. But generally, what I'd say is when you apply to us, we'll look at what match funding you're looking at. We'll look at whether or not it is secured yet, and then what your plans are for securing that. So when you would hear, and we'll take that into account. But I don't think there's any like specific way of tackling that.
No, indeed. And I know from experience that obviously the National Lottery Heritage Fund is the kind of go-to funder for many in the waterways restoration sector. So it does tend to be the funder that then other funding fits around potentially. And I know funders such as the Garfield Western want to see funding committed before they will support you. So again, I think the rules are quite specific to each funder in terms of what they like to see in place before they will fund you. But again, the lottery tends to be that sort of primary funder for quite a number of organisations, I think, to then fit match funding around. Question again about match funding. Do you prefer to see cash or payment in kind, such as volunteer hours contributed? And if either or of those carries more weight?
So I think we're happy to see either or a mix. What I would say is if you're coming to us for a large grant, then generally we'd like to see some cash in there, because we make payments at the larger level in arrears where you spend the money and then we pay you back. So it's just making sure that you have got some funding to help with cash flow.
Thank you. I've just had another comment to say local authorities rarely fund anything until most other funding is secured. So thank you to David for commenting on that one. Just a few more minutes, I suppose, just before we conclude our session. Just time for another couple of funders, questions rather, for our funder today. So what methods could be used to record social impact before, during and after the grant? So I suppose it's following on from the consultation question, but what measures do you tend to see of those social outcomes?
So we have got some guidance on evaluation on the website. So if you have a look at the website, in the best practice section, there's some guidance in there on evaluation, and also each application form guidance. There's also guidance in there as well on evaluation and what we expect to see too.
That's helpful. Yes, again, read the guidance on that and then understand what the measures will be. And I'm running out of questions, so now is the time to ask if, oh no, a few more have appeared. So would the Lottery Heritage Fund consider applications from 2 separate organisations for separate projects within a larger overall project?
Oh, that's an interesting one. So 2 separate projects, but they're part of the same overall project?
Yes, so it sounds like there are 2, consider applications from 2 separate organisations for separate projects, but within, I presume, an umbrella of a large project.
Okay, so I think potentially, I think I'd probably want to have a conversation with you to understand what the 2 projects are, what the larger project is, and also who the 2 organisations are as well, and then provide advice on that basis.
Okay. And to finish up, I have a question about diversifying funding streams as a result of COVID. Again, has the lottery, you mentioned your digital initiatives earlier, have you seen any particular trends or things that are working for people to access new and diverse ways of accessing funding while a lot of programs are still closed?
Sorry, I'm not sure I understand. Can you repeat
that? Diversifying funding streams. So, I mean, again, I'm happy to sort of talk about this a little bit, but it's just whether you've had any experience of organisations that have found funding in new and interesting ways during this interesting year.
I can't think of any off the top of my head, but I know that like with the Heritage Emergency Funding, a number of the organisations who applied to that, they were looking at diversifying income and looking at new ways of doing things. And again, with that, with those schemes that have launched today as well, I think that's one of the things that is looked at, and at least one of those schemes. So definitely worth having a look at those. And I think with those schemes, most of them you need to sign up for them, so do have a look and get your name down for them. And I think you're probably more or less the first people to know about it, so you're ahead of the game.
Yeah, so I was just going to comment in terms of diversifying your funding. I think obviously a lot of organisations have really suffered from the lack of income generation from this year, so I think that's a tricky one to try and replace. And I think a lot of funders have either closed their doors during the crisis, diverted funding into COVID-specific type concerns, but again, having an ear to the ground, I think, is particularly useful. So with the short notice that you sometimes get on these kind of emergency funds, it's very useful to be connected to your local authority, to your local volunteer organisation, to your LEP, to the kind of people that are putting out funding advice, but possibly also putting out sort of quick turnaround funding calls. So I would really recommend that people sign up to, obviously, the Heritage Lottery newsletters, find out about the funds that have been released today. Well, not funds as such, but the initiatives and the support that's available through the what's been announced today. Just sign up for all the newsletters. There's a one organisation that I've signed up to is called the Charity Framework Initiative. A chap who's just updating lists of funders. So I would say contact me if you'd like details of that, and also contact me if you would be interested in subscribing to the Grants Online package. Yeah, all kinds of ways of finding out about funds, but try the digital methods if you can. There's an organisation called Charity Digital that helps organisations kind of convert some of their fundraising activity to digital. They've got a website that it's worth looking up. So yes, on that, I've got, I think, one more question, and then I think we'll sum up. So a question about evaluation, which is a good question to conclude with. It's worth considering that evaluation is often easier and more convincing in relation to activities and volunteering. That's possibly more of a statement than a question, but if you've got any ideas around the sort of evaluation of activities with volunteers.
I think one thing that we are now recommending in terms of evaluation that I think is important, both in terms of activities but in terms of the project as a whole, is just to make sure that it's built in right from the start, and also that you have got your baseline information as well. One thing that we're also recommending is to actually include a cost in your budget for an external evaluator to carry out your evaluation for you as well, which was a recommendation that came out of was reviewing all the evaluation that we'd received, well, a large chunk of the evaluation that we received, and seeing what came out of that. And that was one of the things that came out of there quite strongly, to make sure an amount's included in the budget and to think about using an external evaluator as well.
Okay. Good advice. Thank you, Liz. So I think on that note, we will sum up and end the session. Just before you all disappear, I just want to say, obviously, a really huge thank you to Liz for sparing her time today to explain how the sort of inner workings of the Heritage Lottery, which I think is much appreciated. Thank you, Liz. And just want to say we have got a feedback mechanism. Obviously, you can't scribble anything on a piece of paper at the moment and send it to us, but we're using Slido, which you may or may not have heard of. It's a really, really easy way to give us a little bit of feedback about how you found our restoration conference sessions this year. I think we're putting a link in to the Slido feedback, but you can also just go to the Slido website and use the hashtag RestWeb to give your feedback. So that would be really very much appreciated if you're able to do that. Just want to mention a couple of other things. I mentioned our fundraising surgeries that we need to put in a new date for, so watch this space for that as a one-to-one opportunity to talk through your fundraising issues with myself and Sam from the Canal and River Trust. I will share my email address with you for doing that as well. Just to finish up by saying we've got a session next week that's being led by Peter Walker, that's all about your exit strategy from restoration to navigation. But thank you everyone who's joined us today. I've found it incredibly useful, so I hope you have too. And thank you again to Liz and all the behind the scenes team who have helped put this together. And hopefully we'll get to see you all in person at some point in the not too distant future. So thank you all. We'll close there and say farewell.
Thank you.